When she first walked away, it likely felt like freedom, a release from responsibility, from expectations, from the emotional weight that comes with a real connection. In the beginning, distance can feel empowering because it removes familiarity and replaces it with novelty. But over time, life has a way of revealing truth without saying a word. What initially felt like comfort slowly turns into comparison, and that's when clarity begins. Away from you, life didn't become calmer or more fulfilling, it became more revealing. The men she encountered may have offered attention, excitement, or temporary distraction, but something was missing. There was no grounded presence, no quiet strength, no emotional leadership. She began to notice how often situations felt chaotic, how emotions escalated quickly, and how uncertainty followed even the simplest interactions. The contrast became impossible to ignore. What she once viewed as ordinary in you was actually strength. Your consistency wasn't boring, it was stabilizing. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was control. And your calm wasn't passivity, it was confidence. Without that energy in her life, she experienced the difference between surface level comfort and real emotional safety. Life wasn't punishing her, it was educating her. As time passed, she realized that many people confuse intensity with depth. Loud emotions, drama, and unpredictability can feel exciting at first, but they rarely provide peace. When challenges arose, there was no one steady enough to hold emotional space, no one who could remain centered when things became uncertain. That absence highlighted what you naturally provided without effort. Life also stripped away illusion. Without emotional familiarity to soften reality, she saw patterns clearly. Inconsistency became exhausting. Emotional immaturity became obvious, and the lack of direction in others became frustrating. In that clarity, your strength stood out not because you were perfect, but because you were solid. The realization didn't arrive as regret right away, it arrived as discomfort, as quiet dissatisfaction, as the feeling that something essential was missing. Over time, that discomfort turned into awareness. She began understanding that what she left behind wasn't limitation, it was stability. And stability, once lost, becomes deeply valuable. This is how life teaches lessons, not through force, but through contrast, not through guilt, but through experience. And through that experience, she began recognizing that what she thought she needed wasn't what actually sustained her. That's when it became clear she didn't leave strength behind because she outgrew it. She left because she didn't yet understand its value. When she was with you, emotional stability may have felt invisible. Not because it wasn't there, but because it was constant. A steady presence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't create drama or demand attention, it simply holds things together quietly. When she left, she didn't immediately notice its absence. At first, life felt lighter. But as time passed, emotional stability became something she could no longer ignore because it was missing. Without your grounded energy, everyday situations began to feel heavier. Small problems turned into emotional stress. Decisions felt uncertain. Conversations felt unpredictable. She began to notice how often emotions escalated around her and how few people could remain calm when things became uncomfortable. What she once experienced naturally with you now felt rare. Emotional stability isn't about controlling situations or people, it's about self control. It's the ability to remain centered regardless of circumstances. You didn't react impulsively. You didn't need emotional reassurance to stay confident. You provided a sense of order simply by being grounded in yourself. And without that presence, she began to feel the emotional cost of instability. As she moved through life, she likely encountered men who were emotionally reactive, men who became defensive, insecure, or distant under pressure. Some demanded constant validation, others withdrew emotionally when things didn't go their way. The contrast became clear. Emotional strength wasn't common, it was exceptional. What made this realization uncomfortable was how subtle it was. There was no dramatic moment of regret. Instead, it showed up in fatigue, in emotional exhaustion, in the realization that peace was harder to find. She began to remember how safe she felt when things were uncertain, how she didn't have to manage her emotions or walk on eggshells. Over time, she understood that emotional stability creates safety. Safety allows trust, trust allows connection. Without that foundation, relationships feel chaotic and draining. She wasn't missing attention, she was missing balance. And balance isn't something that can be forced or faked. The absence of emotional stability also forced self reflection. Without someone to ground situations, she had to face her own emotional patterns. Silence became uncomfortable. Stillness brought clarity. And in that clarity, she recognized that emotional stability is not guaranteed, it must be embodied. That's when she realized what life was showing her. The calm she once took for granted wasn't common, it was rare, and losing it revealed its true value. When distance sets in and emotions settle, one of the first things that returns is perspective. Desire doesn't come back immediately, respect does. Before a woman feels drawn again, she reassesses the man she walked away from, not through emotion, but through observation. She watches how he handles himself without her, how he responds to silence, and how he continues his life. And in that space, respect begins to rebuild. Respect grows when a man doesn't chase what disrespected him. You didn't plead, argue, or try to convince her to see your value. You didn't collapse emotionally or attempt to bargain your way back into her life. Instead, you maintained your standards. You stayed focused on your purpose. That restraint sends a powerful message yourself. Worth doesn't depend on external validation. As time passed, she noticed something different. You didn't linger in the past. You didn't speak badly about her or seek sympathy. You moved forward with quiet confidence. That kind of behavior forces reevaluation. It reframes the dynamic. You are no longer seen as someone seeking approval, but as someone who values himself enough to walk away when respect is compromised. This shift is important because attraction cannot exist without respect. Desire without respect is temporary and unstable. Respect creates the foundation for attraction to return in a healthier form. When she began to see you through that lens again, emotions changed, curiosity replaced certainty, interest replaced indifference. Respect also returns when she realizes that you didn't lose your identity in the relationship. You didn't depend on her for direction or emotional stability. You had your own structure, your own values, and your own sense of self. That independence is magnetic. It signals emotional maturity and leadership. Another key factor is consistency. You didn't send mixed signals. You didn't oscillate between availability and resentment. You remain calm, balanced, and predictable in your behavior. That consistency creates trust, and trust strengthens respect. Over time, she began to understand that your absence wasn't weakness, it was self respect. You didn't leave to punish her, you left to honor yourself, and that distinction matters. It removes drama and replaces it with clarity. When respect returns, attraction follows naturally. It doesn't need to be forced or explained. It grows quietly based on behavior rather than words. That's when she realized life wasn't pulling you away from her, it was showing her who you truly were. After leaving, life began placing new people in her path, and through those experiences, clarity started to form. At first, the differences were subtle. Conversations felt engaging on the surface but lacked depth. Connections sparked quickly but faded just as fast. Over time, patterns became clear. The men she encountered struggled with emotional balance. Some were overly reactive, others were emotionally unavailable. Many lacked the maturity to handle discomfort without turning it into conflict. And in those moments, comparison happened naturally. With you, emotions didn't feel like a negotiation. Disagreements didn't escalate into power struggles. There was space to breathe, think, and communicate without pressure. That emotional maturity wasn't something you performed, it was who you were. And once she experienced the opposite elsewhere, that difference stood out clearly. Emotional maturity reveals itself under stress. When things didn't go as planned in other connections, reactions were immediate and uncontrolled. Silence felt tense instead of calm. Conversations felt heavy instead of grounding. She began to notice how often she had to manage other people's emotions, how often she felt responsible for keeping peace. That exhaustion became a mirror reflecting what she no longer had. Comparison isn't about longing, it's about awareness. Life exposed emotional gaps she didn't see before. Men who were charming at first revealed insecurity beneath the surface. Others lacked direction, consistency, or accountability. The emotional labor she didn't have to carry with you now became unavoidable. This is where understanding deepened. Emotional maturity isn't loud, it doesn't demand attention or validation. It shows up as steadiness, patience, and clarity. It allows space for emotions without being controlled by them. And once she recognized how rare that was, your presence began to carry new weight. She also began to realize that emotional maturity creates safety. Not comfort through familiarity, but safety through trust. Trust that emotions won't be weaponized. Trust that disagreement won't lead to instability. Trust that growth doesn't require chaos. That safety became something she missed. The realization didn't arrive as regret at first, it arrived as contrast, and through that contrast, your value became clear. You weren't just someone from her past, you were the benchmark by which everything else was measured. That's when life made its point. Emotional maturity isn't common, and losing it changes how everything else feels. After leaving, life began placing new people in her path, and through those experiences, clarity started to form. At first, the differences were subtle. Conversations felt engaging on the surface but lacked depth. Connections sparked quickly but faded just as fast. Over time, patterns became clear. The men she encountered struggled with emotional balance. Some were overly reactive, others were emotionally unavailable. Many lacked the maturity to handle discomfort without turning it into conflict. And in those moments, comparison happened naturally. With you, emotions didn't feel like a negotiation. Disagreements didn't escalate into power struggles. There was space to breathe, think, and communicate without pressure. That emotional maturity wasn't something you performed, it was who you were. And once she experienced the opposite elsewhere, that difference stood out clearly. Emotional maturity reveals itself under stress. When things didn't go as planned in other connections, reactions were immediate and uncontrolled. Silence felt tense instead of calm. Conversations felt heavy instead of grounding. She began to notice how often she had to manage other people's emotions, how often she felt responsible for keeping peace. That exhaustion became a mirror, reflecting what she no longer had. Comparison isn't about longing, it's about awareness. Life exposed emotional gaps she didn't see before. Men who were charming at first revealed insecurity beneath the surface. Others lacked direction, consistency, or accountability. The emotional labor she didn't have to carry with you now became unavoidable. This is where understanding deepened. Emotional maturity isn't loud, it doesn't demand attention or validation. It shows up as steadiness, patience, and clarity. It allows space for emotions without being controlled by them. And once she recognized how rare that was, your presence began to carry new weight. She also began to realize that emotional maturity creates safety, not comfort through familiarity, but safety through trust. Trust that emotions won't be weaponized. Trust that disagreement won't lead to instability. Trust that growth doesn't require chaos. That safety became something she missed. The realization didn't arrive as regret at first, it arrived as contrast, and through that contrast, your value became clear. You weren't just someone from her past, you were the benchmark by which everything else was measured. That's when life made its point. Emotional maturity isn't common, and losing it changes how everything else feels. As time passed, another truth began to surface, one that life teaches slowly and without mercy. Consistency is rare. At first, excitement distracted her. New attention felt flattering. New energy felt refreshing. But excitement fades, and when it does, what remains is behavior. Patterns don't lie, and that's when she began to notice what was missing. Promises were made easily, but kept inconsistently. Words sounded good in the moment, but lacked follow through. Effort came in waves, strong at the beginning, weak when comfort set in. She started feeling the instability of uncertainty, never fully knowing where she stood. And without realizing it, her nervous system stayed alert, waiting for things to drop. With you, consistency wasn't dramatic. You didn't need grand gestures to prove interest. You showed up the same way on good days and bad days. Your mood didn't dictate your values. Your effort didn't disappear when things became familiar. That reliability didn't feel exciting at first, it felt normal. And that's why it was overlooked. Life has a way of revealing the cost of inconsistency. Plans changed last minute. Communication slowed without explanation. Emotional availability depended on convenience. Slowly, trust eroded, not because of one big mistake, but because of many small ones. And in that erosion, comparison returned. She remembered how calm things felt with you, how there was no guessing game, how clarity replaced anxiety, how peace didn't have to be earned daily. That consistency created emotional grounding, something she didn't recognize the value of until it was gone. Consistency also reflects character. Anyone can show intensity for a short time. Few can maintain effort without applause. You didn't perform commitment, you lived it. And when life introduced her to inconsistency elsewhere, your steadiness became unforgettable. Another realization followed. Consistency creates attraction that deepens over time. It doesn't spike emotions, it stabilizes them. And stability allows intimacy to grow. Without it, connection stays shallow regardless of chemistry. She also began to see how inconsistency affects self worth. When effort fluctuates, doubt grows. When communication is unclear, insecurity follows. She found herself questioning things she never questioned with you. And that internal shift mattered. What once felt predictable now felt priceless. What once felt routine now felt rare. Life wasn't punishing her, it was educating her, showing her the difference between temporary excitement and lasting value. That's when she understood something clearly. Consistency isn't boring, it's the foundation of everything that lasts. Eventually, the final realization arrived, not through emotion, but through absence. Life became quieter, and in that quiet, truth had space to speak. When distractions faded and validation slowed, she was left with reflection, and reflection doesn't lie. She noticed how peace was missing. Not excitement, not drama, peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing where you stand, from trusting someone's intentions, from feeling emotionally safe without needing constant reassurance. That piece had been part of her life before and now was gone with you. Love didn't feel like a test. It didn't require constant evaluation. You didn't create emotional highs followed by confusion. You were steady, present, grounded, and once life removed noise and novelty, that steadiness became undeniable. She also realized that growth feels different with the right person. Growth with you didn't feel like pressure, it felt supportive, encouraging. You didn't compete with her progress or feel threatened by it. You led by example, not control. And that balance is rare. Life also taught her that regret isn't loud. It doesn't scream, it settles quietly. It shows up in moments of comparison, in pauses between conversations, in memories triggered by familiar feelings. Not because the past was perfect, but because it was real. This wasn't about idealizing you. It was about recognizing alignment, emotional values, communication style, stability. the things that don't fade with time. And once those were clear, emotions followed naturally. She understood that walking away didn't make you smaller, it revealed your strength. You didn't beg to be chosen, you chose yourself. And that choice changed how you were remembered. Absence reframed your value. When she thought about reaching out, it wasn't from loneliness, it was from clarity, not to fix the past, but to reconnect with what felt grounded and real. Life didn't bring her back out of regret, it brought her back through understanding. And when understanding replaces emotion, actions follow. That's when she knew life wasn't taking her away from you, it was showing her who you truly were all along.